Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. What's your most crazy, scary, or frightening real-life story? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I was house-sitting for my neighbor a few years back, and I was lying in bed just starting to drift off when I heard noise from downstairs. There were 3 dogs, but they were all sleeping. Assuming it was all in my head and hearing things, I closed my eyes. Within 10 seconds, I hear another shuffle and clunk. This time, the dogs are awoken, jerking their heads up and growling in low tones. My eyes are wide open again, but I'm unable to move my body. There's more noise, and now I can clearly distinguish that it's coming from the breachway porch. And now, someone is rattling the doorknob. The dogs jump up and run to the closed-off door, aggressively barking and carrying on. My body is frozen. I'm experiencing complete sleep paralysis, with the exception of my eyes. At this point, my eyes are fully adjusted to the darkness. I can see everything so clearly. The dogs freaking out, and my phone in reach on the bedside table. It was a pretty secluded area, so there would be no way of someone knowing there was an intruder and being able to help. I'm unable to move. There's someone downstairs. I'm all alone, and it's not in my head. There was no confirmation from the dogs. I close my eyes and just pray that whoever is downstairs will be scared off by the dogs. They continued to carry on for what seemed like a lifetime, but finally quieted down, and I didn't hear anything more. I was starting to regain my mobility, but was too scared to take action and investigate. Eventually, I exhausted myself with fear and fell asleep. When I was about 13 or so, my parents decided I was old enough to stay at home alone whilst they went out. It was about 11. I decided to call it a night, left my bedroom door open so I'd get some light, and got into bed. After about 5 minutes, I heard something at the bottom of the stairs. I figured it was probably my sister coming home. Then I heard it take one step, then another, slowly working its way up the stairs. Finally, it got to the landing. I was 100% freaked out, and then I heard something else. A man's voice whispering, "Knock, knock, knock." I bolted out of bed, slammed my door shut, and sat there trying not to piss my pants for about a quarter of an hour. The next day, I told my parents about it. Sister said it was her. About a week later, she tells me Mom had made me say it was her. I was so glad when we moved. I have a friend who lived by herself in a pretty shitty neighborhood about 10 years ago. For a few months, she had been coming home and had the feeling someone had been in her house. She shrugged it off as being paranoid from smoking weed, and any one of her friends that she told about feeling said the same thing. Then she started noticing the magnets on her fridge would be in different places. After that, she started noticing new magnets on her fridge from local businesses from a different state. Then she started noticing cigarette butts in her ashtray that weren't the brand she or any of her friends smoked. That was the last straw for her. Her friends dismissed her claims as just side effects from smoking weed. The police were apathetic at best and barely even let her file a report. She realized that her only option was to take care of it herself somehow. So one night, she borrowed her boyfriend's car and sat in her apartment with the lights off to make it look like she wasn't home. She sat there for 45 minutes listening to the buildings settle and the sounds of the city when suddenly, as she puts it, something in her gut told her to get up and leave. She didn't question it for a second. She grabbed her keys and rushed out of her apartment, and she didn't look back until she had reached her boyfriend's car. When she looked back at her apartment, she saw this huge black silhouette climbing into her apartment from the balcony. She moved out the next day. Similarly, I had a manager a few years back who had been fighting with her husband because one of them lost their keys. They had to go through the dealership to get a car key made and all sorts of other hassles. It was a big mess, and neither my manager nor her husband owned up to being the last person to have the keys before they went missing. 2 to 3 days later, My manager unexpectedly had to stop by her home in the middle of the workday, and she found all of their electronics and other various valuables in a pile in their living room. She promptly called the cops, who, upon investigating, discovered that someone had been living in their attic for an estimated 2 months. They, too, moved the next day. They had 2 little girls under 5 years old to boot. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, I used to ride to the corner 1 street over from my house to meet my brother's bus. He was in high school, but would then put me on his handlebars and get us home. I loved it because he would go fast. This particular day, my dad told me not to go, but I went. And as I was waiting for him, now, this was the corner of a very busy road. I saw a group of bikers riding past, maybe 6 or 8. They were riding side by side. Anyway, a few cars later, there were 2 bikers riding by for some reason. I froze when I saw them. I kept looking as they drove past me, but then one of them on the left called to his friend beside him and pointed back to me. I knew instantly that they were going to come after me, but they were on the left side and I was on the right, so they had to wait to turn, which I see them start slowing down. Now here's where I prove kids shouldn't be alone at a young age. Instead of running into the gas station right on the corner, I started riding in the middle of the street, thinking I could get home before they got to me. I rode so fast, everything around me blurred, and I couldn't see anymore. Then I smelled fish. I didn't realize this, but I had passed out in the middle of the road, almost near the shop at my house. There's a woman standing over me who's been cleaning fish on her front porch. I look back, and the 2 bikies are just turning into the street, coming toward us. I wasn't able to move, I just froze. She sees them, stands over my body, and waits for them to come. I didn't make a sound. They got halfway to us, stopped, and just stared at her. Then they turned and rode off. I think they thought it was my mother or something. She kept me hidden at her house for about half an hour, then took me home via a back lane. I still feel uncomfortable when I see lots of bikies together. I struggle with this now too. My son is 11 and I want to give him the freedom that I had when I was 11, and I'd ride my bike all day and I'd ride down across to the little mall, run errands, go to farm stands. And now it's like, I don't know. Did we change as parents? Did the world change? Is it the access to information that makes us more pensive to allow that freedom? That inherent fear that something's always going to happen to your child? I don't know. I'm torn. How do you guys feel about it? Not me, but a friend. My friend lives in a century-old house in our city. You can tell it's old. It's a 3-level house with a really creepy attic on the 3rd floor. The bedrooms are on the 2nd floor, and the living kitchen area on the 1st, etc. Her bedroom is quite large, with a weird, small closet above her head. It's like a storage closet, hole-in-the-wall type thing. She stores old toys and clothes in there, whatnot. She's always told me that she thinks it's haunted, or that she has a guardian angel in the house. Anyway, we were hanging out one night, and I'm always curious about creepy paranormal things. She goes on to tell me that she had woken up one night to hear an old toy in her closet going off. It was one of those wind-up toys that slowly spins as it plays music. It's been a while since she told me this story, so forgive me if I missed details. It played for a bit, and she just sat there frozen until it stopped. A couple of minutes later, it started again, and she started to freak out. She told whatever it was to stop and even tried climbing into the closet to turn it off, but couldn't reach the toy. Eventually, it stopped. She's had several experiences like this. She has 2 cats and a dog, and they all have stared at the one corner in her bedroom all at once. We've actually left my phone recording in her attic a couple of times and caught a few things too. Freaked us both right out. The creepiest thing I've heard, still gives me chills thinking about it, is on the first recording. We were the only ones home on the 2nd floor, her dad napping on the couch on the 1st floor or something, is somebody saying her name. Now, we know it's neither of us, and it's definitely not her dad, as it was a female voice, but it's so clear. It sounds almost like her mom just quickly shouted her name, but her mom wasn't home. We've also heard sneezing, coughing, tons of footsteps, and things moving around. Of course, never finding what moved around. We've tried recording a video, only tried once, but didn't catch much. Her house still gives me the creeps, but I still want to try recording more and more things, lol. About when I was 14 to 15, I was staying in my dad's house near Houston, Texas in Magnolia. It was for the weekend as my parents were divorced, and that's all we could do due to the distance in school. Well, when I got there, my stepmom told me how my dad had seen a woman in white floating near the edge of the light from the porch a few times when they would go out to smoke. It was always the same thing, with him getting midway through a cigarette, seeing her, and going inside soon after. The last time that happened, she had actually advanced toward him much quicker than she should have, and my father flies into the house, sheet white. Not too bad, but enough to scare me a little, as ghosts have always given me the creeps. She also recounts phantom lights, cars coming from up the driveway, people getting out, footsteps on the porch, and nobody being there. Sure enough, at around 9 p.m., phantom cars come up in increasing frequency, maxing at 5 times per 30 minutes. Eventually, I get used to it, and they go to bed, leaving me to sleep in the living room, which has large windows showing the front porch and leading into the front yard. Luckily for me, I have insomnia problems from time to time, and ended up staying up late. Eventually, I get a weird feeling that people were on the porch, so I try my best to ignore this, as the blinds could only block so much of the window. Soon, this evolves into a feeling of being watched, and at 3 a.m., feels like they're in the living room with me. I'm scared shitless, but I manage to fall asleep somehow and have odd dreams from reading Beowulf earlier. The next morning, my stepmom wakes early, and according to her, it sounds like there's a maelstrom in the living room, with glass breaking, people screaming, things hitting the wall, and her door shaking occasionally. When it dies down, she goes out of her room, and I'm sleeping peacefully. The last thing that happened when I was there was that morning, I walked onto the porch and saw a large flock of crows flying in a wide circle around the yard, very close to the ground. My dad left shortly after. This happened just last night. I usually keep my windows open when I go to sleep. I also sleep on the first floor, but the window is 10 feet up. That's relevant to the story. I was half asleep when I felt someone hit me in the back. It wasn't a hard punch, but also not a soft one. I immediately snapped awake and turned around. I brushed it off as my brain playing tricks on me. I was half asleep, so it'd make sense. As I turned around, I noticed the window is closed. I just assumed my friend closed it. I got up to open it again, and in the distance, I see a man standing in my neighbor's yard, staring at me. It was dark, but I could tell his body was facing forward, with his head looking back at me. I'm pretty sure he was holding a wooden plank in his hand. My window was right next to my bed, and I didn't want to get out of bed, so I was still on the bed when I opened the window. I got completely off the bed to get a better look, and the man was gone when I looked back outside. When I was 12, my best friend and I were a couple of hooligans. We lived in a small town in Wisconsin and rode our bikes around town all summer long, looking for fun stuff to do. One day he told me about a warehouse that was holding a ton of merchandise from some dollar store that went under, and he knew how to get in. So we rode our bikes down and broke in through a small window and started snooping around. About 10 minutes into it, we had a small treasure of fake gold rings and Laffy Taffy. That's when we heard the door of the warehouse open, and we were trapped inside this little room filled with boxes. He and I just looked at each other for a second, and he whispered for me to hide. He hid behind the door, but there wasn't enough room for me to get behind there too, so I found a little closet to duck into. The problem was there wasn't a door and really nowhere to hide in the closet, so if they looked around the corner, they would see me right there. Moments later, 2 guys came into the room talking about someone breaking into the warehouse recently and that they were going to beat the hell out of them if they ever found out who it was. I was shaking so bad as they were looking through some of their inventory, trying to take slow, quiet breaths and just hoping they would leave. They were there for about 10 minutes. Even after they left, My friend and I just stood there frozen in case they came back. Eventually, we got the balls to get out of there and took off on our bikes. That was the first and last time I ever broke into a building. The Laffy Taffy still tasted great though. I remember it was the kind that had sprinkles on it. The only time I can think of that wasn't supernatural was when I was about 18 back in '98. I was dating a girl from the next town over, and it was about a 10 to 15 mile drive on the highway. One of those highways where there's nothing around but trees for about 10 miles, and the only light at night are your headlights. I was driving over to see my girlfriend just before dark, and the roads were fairly empty. But I and this truck, not a pickup truck, but one of those trucks kind of like the UPS guy drives, with no doors on them, it was from some plumbing company. I drove past the guy, and for some reason he flipped out. I didn't cut him off or anything. We were the only two cars on a road that were 2 lanes each way, so I just passed him. He flips out, drives up beside me, starts screaming, gesturing, then tries to run me off the road. I slow down so he can pass me, so he gets in front of me and starts slamming on his brakes, trying to get me to stop. I try to get around him a few times, and he keeps swerving and trying to hit me. This was before cell phones were everywhere, so I couldn't just call the cops. I eventually got around him and took off, as my car was much faster than his. I called the plumbing company when I got to my destination, and they said they didn't have any trucks out. So I don't know what this guy's deal was.